Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to the show Talk on Point with me, your host, Oscar Maisiri. I'm sure you can hear me loud and clear.
Yes, thanks.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. So thank you for tuning in. For those who are watching us live on Facebook, as I said, this is Talk on Point, a show that brings you very necessary conversations. And today we are here to talk about grace in the blender, a conversation about step families. Basically, we are looking at the experiences of living as step families. I remember a few days ago when I advertised on Facebook, somebody came to me and asked me, what is a step family? What is a blended family? I realized, well, most people don't know what it is, but I will explain briefly that a blended family or step family forms when you and your partner make a life together with the children from one or both of your previous relationships. We know that things happen in life where you have a child, maybe from a first marriage and doesn't work, or you lose your spouse, then you decide to get married again, and that forms a blended family. So today I am so excited to be joined by three great couples I've known, and you realize how much I know them as we go through the conversation. But I would like to, at this moment, just introduce you to our panelists who are with us. I'll begin with Fanny and Delena, who are here in Pretoria, and I've asked them to briefly introduce themselves and at the same time make us aware of how they became a blended family. So over to you, Fan and Delena.
Thank you, Oscar. Yeah, I'm a semi-retired civil engineer. I worked mostly for government and also in a private company. And I've been married for more than 20 years and then got divorced. And then after some more than 3 years, God blessed me with the opportunity to get married to Dalena. And so we're very blessed in that regard. I brought 3 children to the new relationship, and Dalena can say who she is.
Yes, I'm an educational psychologist, semi-retired, and I was married before for 21 years. And when I got divorced, I was on my own with my 3 children that I brought up then for 7 years when I met Fanny. So our children were already adult children. Only one at school. She finished matric that year that I met him. The other two were already at university and, well, at other places where they were studying. So it wasn't a real in-house marriage that we had the children with us.
Thank you so much, Fanny and Delina, for the introduction. I'd like to move across the Limpopo River to Zimbabwe to Miss, rather the couple Des and Una Nyikadzino. Thank you, Des and Una, for joining us. And would you kindly introduce yourselves to us and let us know how you became a blended family?
Thank you, Oscar. I hope you can all hear me and see me clearly enough. I have to send my apologies. Sorry?
You can't see the video?
You can't see the video?
Yeah, it's muted.
That's, oh.
There you go.
No, it's muted. There you go, right? There we go, yeah. So my apologies, my wife is unavailable to join me because of prior commitments that she already had, which unfortunately we couldn't escape, or she couldn't escape. But I'll be here and I'll represent her as fairly as I can. Yeah, and enjoy being part of this conversation. How did I end up in a blended family? Well, I was married before, got married in 2002. And then after 11 years in 2013, my wife passed away. We had 2 kids at that stage. The one was 4 and the other was just shy of 2. And I got married to Una almost 3 years later. And she had a single child, a boy. So she was a single mom. And yeah, it's a pretty fascinating story how we got to be in that, because even before my wife passed away, we were involved in their lives, in the lives of this young man and Una, because they were best friends with our eldest son. And so at the instigation of my wife, in a sense, I played kind of a fatherly role to this young man when we realized that he was coming from a single mom home. And we just kind of carried on being friends after my first wife died, until one day when she had come to pick up her son, who she had left with me for a play date for the day. And these 3 little guys are walking behind us and they start giggling. So we turned back and the 2 older boys had been whispering something to each other, and my little girl was at the back. And we said, well, what is it? And one of them quips, you 2 should get married. And her boy says, yes, then I'd have a dad. And my little girl goes, yes, then I'd have a mom. And we thought, wow, okay, I guess there is something to this. And yeah, that's kind of when, we started thinking about it a little differently than just being friends. And yeah, there's more to it. I mean, in terms of just, how God worked and moved to ending up with our kids being best friends at the same school. It was all just amazingly miraculous stuff, if you think about it, or when we look back and we see God's fingerprints in that. So that's that's our story. We've got 4 little boys. So Una had 1 and I had 2, and those the 2 boys, Una's and mine, they just turned 12 this year. My one turned 12 in February, and the other one, I don't know why I say my one, because they are all mine. Anyways, the other turned 12 in October, and our little girl turned 9 in September. And whoops, I don't know if you can still see me there. I had a call interrupt me. I think I'm back. And we then have 1 boy together, and he is 3.5, little Josh. So we've got Josh and Erin as the girl, and Taboka, and Sean is the oldest. That's us.
Wow, thank you so much. What an interesting story indeed. We will be hearing more, of that story as we get through our conversation. Thank you so much. We are moving back to Pretoria to Dev and Karen. just introduce themselves and also let us know how they became step families, blended families.
You're going to say. Hi, everyone. I'm Dave. This is Karen, my wife. We met 5 years ago, but leading up to that, I'd been married for 32 years. My wife and I were in the States at that stage, and she contracted cancer, and within a year, she passed away. I came back to South Africa and just stayed in our home, which the kids had been looking after. They adult kids. And when they moved out, I felt increasingly lonely for a number of years, and it just got worse as the time progressed. And I desperately needed someone just to connect with and so on. And so started my search for soulmate, someone I could share my life with. As I said, I have 2 children, boys. They are married, and we have 3 beautiful grandchildren. Currently, I'm retired, and I'm a children's author. I write Christian books for kids, generally focusing on 5 to 12-year age group. Up to you.
Yes, I just want to add that Dave's book, one of his most well-known books, is The Bible Made Easy for Kids. He actively runs and manages his own website, which is www.truthforkids.com. And he's been used by the Lord worldwide in children's ministry. And we met on a website called Connecting Christians. Dave was looking for someone to love. And I think that's very key to a happy marriage, looking for someone to love, not looking for someone to love him. And he purchased a 3-month membership on this website with the logic that if God didn't provide him with someone in 3 months in the Pretoria area, he needed just to accept that. Whereas I purchased a lifetime membership, as I felt that after 2 divorces, sad to say, I did not deserve a 3rd husband. So I was unlikely to find someone who'd really want to commit to a relationship with me. But interestingly enough, the first email I received was from Dave on the 1st of May, 2015. I was in Cape Town and Dave was actually in Pretoria. After seeing each other on 4 occasions, we got married on the 1st of August, 2015. So it was really exciting how God brought all our puzzle pieces together. And after 5 years of living in Pretoria, we look back in absolute wonder and awe at how God brought us together. And for that, we give him all the glory. I'm not retired. I do work from home as a financial planner. I'm also involved with the music ministry at our local church. It's my passion to encourage people from all walks of life just to become the best that they can be, regardless of their circumstances. And this passion is integrated into my profession. That's really how I bring together financial planning and people. I have 2 of my own children, and they're both adults, 3 grandchildren. So we're blessed with 6 grandchildren between us.
Wow, it's indeed absolutely wonderful, as you put it, Karen, to hear how God brought you together, all of you. Just listening from your stories, can tell that, God is wonderful. And now there is always a challenge, I think, in terms of moving on, not only in terms of you as an individual who wants to move on with her life or his life in getting this wonderful lady or this handsome man for you to marry, but children. you have to think of the children, when you decide to do this. So I would like to hear from Dave and Karen. How did you introduce each other to your children? Was it easy? And yeah, just to hear from you.
All right. Our children had been out of the house for some time, so it wasn't going to be too much of a shock or an adjustment for them to adapt to us getting married, living together in a home. It wasn't awkward for them in any way. What we did for the one son who was here in Pretoria, we took them out to dinner and introduced, well, I told him what had happened. By then he knew about Karen, and what we decided was to get married. And he jumped up and hugged both of us and his wife too. And I think that was symbolic of their acceptance. They knew I was struggling, bordering on depression to some extent, just lonely. And I think they were glad, very glad for me. And also Simon, my son in Cape Town, was very pleased with the news. And so it was very positive. But in terms of a direct impact, I think it was minimal in terms of their life and their own families.
Well, for me, because I was in Cape Town, at the time, I told my two children that I was coming up via email. They heard that I'd met someone over email, and we met them in a restaurant as well. So the first time Dave and I physically saw each other, we went to meet my children in the restaurant, and they were over the moon. Yeah, so we were very excited.
This is quite encouraging to hear that, your kids, although, as you have highlighted, they'd already sort of moved out of family. Your lives in a way, because
Yes.
they had started their own lives. But, the excitement that they had, and also listening to Des when he was talking about the kids, just suggesting that, you two should be, should be our parents. This is very exciting, because a lot of people, they are stuck in thinking, okay, if I make this decision, what about my kids? What are they going to think of me? And yet, when I listen to you, both of you, Dev and Karen, and also Des, you can see that God had already gone ahead of you. So this is really encouraging. I think, people are listening there. If you are scared of, okay, should I move on because of the children? God has already taken care of you. I don't know, for fun and Delena, if you want to add something to that effect, in terms of you introducing yourselves to the children.
Yeah, thank you, Oscar. It really sounds like Dave and Karen's situation was absolutely wonderful, idealistic, and so on. I think ours were a little different in the sense that our children knew each other from school. They were not always in the same class and so on, but they were at school, and also at Sunday school, they knew each other. But when we started our courtship, we were in courtship for more than 3 years. And there were some events that we arranged, and the children came into contact with each other. And so I can't really say there was a specific event.
I can remember one.
Okay.
I came home from work one day, and my youngest child was then just finished matric, and she told me that somebody phoned for me, and she thought it was like in the Sunday school, the children, long ago, like 10 years ago or more. And he asked her, and she could remember the person, and she said, he asked her if she thought that that I might go out with him. And I asked her, and what did you say? And she said, no, I said, yes, of course you will go out with him. So actually my youngest child introduced me to him. We didn't have the opportunity to introduce him to my children.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Could I add something?
Okay.
May I add something, Oscar? I think it's great when the children are adults or in a situation where they know each other and they're friends with each other. But in a family where two adults come together and they've got children longing for the original mother or the original father, if I can put it like that. It's very, very difficult, and I've seen it in many homes, and I saw it with my second marriage, how difficult it is for them to accept this other person where the real mother or real father needed to be. Because the adults get used to each other and accept one another and love one another. And to put children together, it can take them, I believe, up to 7 years to get used to each other. So I'm just throwing this in there. If there's someone listening, that they hear how amazing our stories are and how our children accepted us, but there could well be people struggling with the child saying, I don't want them to be in our home. I don't want them to be my mommy or my daddy. I want my daddy. And that is really, can take up to 7 years for those children to accept the wife or the husband in the home.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karen, for sharing that. Actually, what you've said resonates well with the next question that I have directed to Fan and Delena. That when you two got married, did the blending take place automatically, or it was a process? And yeah, just how was the experience? You know.
Yeah, many people, when we tell them how it came about that our courtship of 3 years eventually got to marriage, they said, well, it was a typical engineering approach and not a human approach. First of all, the two of us got to the point where we sat down and we said, if we can sort out this list of things that could be issues, then we could make a good marriage. And when we compared our lists, they were very similar. And then we also went about to actually discuss with some of the important family members. I discussed with her children getting married. They were far away, so to some of them I just wrote a letter. And also some of the important family members, I didn't ask, she didn't have parents anymore that I could ask for her hand in marriage, so I kind of asked the children and some of the other family members, and we got their blessing to proceed. So they did not have objections. That actually made the blending easier eventually. But we had some very interesting discussions with, we gave the children opportunity to actually raise their objections. And it was some of the objections from the Bible. What does it say? Can you remarry? And all of those. And we had to discuss that with the children and give them comfort. And I think that also assisted them in breaking down the barriers and also setting some boundaries in terms of creating understanding that we are different people and different families and so on. As the children were young adults, we never put pressure on them to call each other brother and sister. We requested them just to respect one another.
Yeah, actually, we said to them that they don't even have to like each other. You know, you can't force that. This is part of the process. They might like each other, we hoped for it. But we told them, you don't have to like each other as long as you have respect for everybody. And I think that helped a lot because they felt it will eventually happen. And but we are not demanding something from them.
Wow, thank you so much. You know, it's indeed great to hear that the children were involved from the beginning, and that made it very easy for the blending to take place. Which I'm not sure if this is very common in our African culture. Maybe we'll hear from Mr. Des as he speaks. But Mr. Des, I would like to ask you a question. In terms of your roles as a husband and wife, did you discuss your roles in your children's lives, and how did that play out in practical terms? You know, when you got married. So the question is, did you discuss your roles before you got married, and then how did that play out? And was it easy or difficult? And some sort of resistance also from the children. I know the children were young, but yeah, was it easy even between the two of you now when you, as the stepfather, maybe executing your role as the father of your wife's son?
Yeah, so I never really thought about that way, and I only started thinking about it when you're asking, did we discuss? And yes, we did actually. I guess just as part of our communicating and relating as we were courting, which was more to do with what we would like to see. Part of it, of course, the kids had already, in a sense, intimated to that. You know, they wanted a mother figure and a father figure that they could recognize, and so we understood that that's what we're coming in there as, and the potential challenges that might come with that, the acceptance or lack of acceptance, the idea that them having grown up, they might decide that, you know, they prefer in my case, of course, their mom then was passed away. But in the case of the other young man, his dad exists. He's never really been involved. But he might go, well, I want to find my biological dad, you know, and just how much of a challenge that could be for the both of us, even just for my wife. So yeah, we talked about that and came to the conclusion that really the best we can do in this whole setting is to parent them so well, as a mom or as a dad, that even if they are then to come into contact or to engage with the other biological side, they've had their parenting done as a mom by Una or as a dad by me in such a way that they can go, you know, we may not have a biological link, but certainly this is dad, or certainly this is mom, as far as I know. So that was the role that was obviously to be played by each of us. But of course, you go in there and you haven't experienced any of this stuff. So you're thinking of things that could happen, things that, you know, that ought to be pursued, or the manner in which they ought to be pursued. But it doesn't always play out the same when it's actually in practice. It's a little harder. So yeah, there obviously have been some of those challenges, and it's been a little hard for me too. I think it's been hard for the both of us, as to fully immerse ourselves and play those roles. I think part of it is also an idea or a perception in each other's mind that tends to think, well, maybe the other person will think, you know, and we fill in the blank. If I do this, with this particular child, maybe the other person will think such and such. And so to then play that role, certainly in my case as a dad, where dads generally tend to be the firmer of the two parents, it's a little harder, and has to be measured, and yet at the same time is a necessity in terms of making sure that whether it's discipline or being there as as a dad, connecting in that way is done to its best for the sake of the child or the children, and yet at the same time, as parents, it's easy to feel protective or defensive, and have to trust that the other parent, as they're doing what they're doing, they're doing that out of love and a care and a concern for the child, and that's probably been the bigger of the challenges. And as I'm speaking with you now, I'm just realizing that the other two couples we have got older children, so they probably didn't have to deal with some of these matters. But yeah, thank goodness that I'm here and I can relate with some of those things, and maybe our listeners can benefit from a little bit of my experience there. I don't remember if there was another part to your question towards the end there that I may not have addressed.
Indeed. Just as a follow-up question, I think it's the issue of how the children must address you, your stepchildren must address you. Did you discuss that as a couple, or you just expected them to address you as mom and dad?
No, we didn't discuss that. But I think we automatically just had that expectation. But also because they were so much younger, that automatically just kind of fell into place for them. We had known each other as uncle and aunt so and so before, or I mean, our kids had known. My kids had known Una as Auntie Una, and her son had known me as Uncle Des. But as we hung out together more, and like I mentioned to you earlier, where they were the first ones to actually instigate the whole thing and say, you two should get married, then I would have a dad, then I would have a mom, is already kind of what they were looking to have. So that wasn't a challenge or a problem at all that we had to discuss or deal with.
Wow, we thank God for that. We thank God for that.
Indeed.
But just another question as well, because when you look at your son, Una's son, your son, the first one with Una, his father is still alive. His father is still there. How then do you make him realize that he has a biological father? Is it easy in the African context? I know those things are sort of gray areas. Our culture is Black African.
Yes, indeed. And I guess by God's grace, our backgrounds, both my wife's and mine, had us very independent, such that our extended families have not been too involved in our lives, because of our own independence. And part of that comes from the fact also, I guess, that we were mature adults, so their influence was neither here nor there. My dad passed away a month after we got married, but he had accepted this young man. Maybe it would have been different if it was that I'm getting married and she had a son and I didn't have any kids before. So I guess also, I think for my whole family, my whole extended family, the acceptance was that much easier, I guess, in that, well, look, you were married, you've already got other kids, so it kind of naturally blends. But you did allude to the African context side, which my friends there might the Black African context side, which they may not be familiar with. But yes, there was potential to go, but he's not your biological child, so he doesn't belong to you. But you know, like I mentioned before, even my first wife passed away, she's the one who had said, you know, I think we need to get this guy into part of our home, and you played that fatherly figure in his life. So you mentioned it actually earlier when you said, you know, in these things and having kids, it seems God would have gone ahead of you, and that's what He honestly did for us. This young man was a huge motivation, and actually for me, in being involved in his life, and subsequently to getting married and being, you know, an official dad figure in his life. That was just a burden that God had put on my heart from before. Yeah. So and the biological dad is not involved, so there hasn't been much of that interaction from his end that pushes an agenda, except of course maybe in the last 2 months or so, where he said he wants to be involved in the young man's life. But that would be the third time that he's come through saying the same, and then just, you know, disappearing again. And you had asked, does he know? Did we chat about it with him? Yes, we did. We had to, because part of what we were trying to do was to do an official adoption, because we thought about it, and we're looking at this whole family, and he's the only one with a surname that's different to the others. And that was something I was happy and willing to do, which is also not characteristically Black African, to adopt another man's child. But that's something that God gave me the grace to be willing to do. But unfortunately, we hit a snag right at the end of the whole application process, sitting before the magistrate, and he says, "Well, you got to get consent of the biological dad," and he wasn't interested in that, not for the good of the child, but just because he wasn't interested, and more for ego than anything else. So unfortunately, now this young man has had to. I mean, why I mentioned that is because you asked if he knew of this biological dad. And so he did, because we had to mention to him that we need to get his permission in order for him to get, you know, a name change and integrate into the family. That's that way. So yeah, we had to mention that and kind of keep updating with him as we could deal with, considering his age.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that, Des. And actually, I would like to come back to you just to look at some of the stereotypes that are associated with like step families in our African culture. We have mentioned already in terms of looking at him as your biological son, you know, where people say, you know, you can't treat him as a biological son. He is not a child. And that comes with a lot of things as well. But moving on, I would like to go back to Fan and Delena. You set a very strong foundation in terms of involving your children from the beginning. And one of the things that you brought up was the issue of respect, that respecting each other and stuff like that. But I would want to hear from you. Did you have a situation where one of your children clearly stated that they didn't, rather they were not going to consider you as a parent? Like either of you, one of your step children?
Well, first of all, I think even in a normal family, you know, not a step relationship, children don't always agree with what parents say or do.
Yeah.
And so there are definitely times when there are differences of opinion and so on. But we discuss that with each other, and then when if the situation occurs where I have a slight disagreement with my children, Delena is there to support me, and the other way around. And but as we never forced the children to the stepchildren to call me dad and mom and so on. You know, now that we are grandparents, they call us Oma and Opa, which makes it easier in any case. So I can't say that we ever had a situation that we had a major rebellion. But of course, there are times when things don't always go as smoothly as we would like to.
Yeah.
We as parents are, of course, idealistic. We would like our children to go in certain directions for occupation or whatever, and then they decide differently, or they must stay in a certain city, and they differ from opinion and they do their own thing. So I don't think we really had that situation that I think in certain cases does occur when there's a major rebellion where the parents, the children, and also a teenager is inherently coming to a stage of manipulation of the parents. And it's very easy to say, I'm not going to listen to you because you're not my dad or you're not my mother. I think that is kind of natural reactions from children, and one has to learn ways to deal with it. We never had the situation like that, but I think it can occur.
Thank you.
I'd like to add, in the beginning, when we got married, actually before that, I also had a talk with Juani's children's previous wife. And it made me realize that there are some, if I have a good relationship with her, you know, then I could also, she could contribute to me understanding the children better. And we tried to manage that. Of course, we had boundaries for that, but you know, she gave me some wonderful information about her children that I could rely on. And that made it easier in the beginning. Of course, later we have like 8 grandchildren now, and I still like it when the sons call me grandma, you know, like the children would do. So that was really a very easy way to go about the way of they will talk to us. It made it easier for us when we became grandparents.
Thank you.
I can also add to that, Oscar. I think it is important that you know, we got married after all the conflict, after our divorces subsided and calmed down, so we could actually have some kind of conversation with the ex-spouses. And what we clearly indicated to our children as well is that the step-parent is not going to take any of the benefits and responsibilities of the real parent away. So we are not we are not competing for the role of mom or dad, and I think that helped also for the children to not to see stepmother or stepdad as a threat to their relationship with the real father or mother. So that is how we try to prevent things like that.
That's awesome. What about you, Dave and Karen? Your experiences with regards to that, where a stepchild does not consider you as a parent? Or
well, one of my sons is adopted, and in a way, that card was played as well to some extent, where you've got to be absolutely fair and treat each child as your own. And whether he's adopted or whether it's a stepchild, I think it's similar in a way, in that you're not a biological dad, but you've got to be equitable and treat them fairly, because children are very perceptive in terms of what's fair and what isn't. They learn that at school, they learn it inherently, they know that. And if they see that there are rules, and those rules apply to all the kids, and if those rules are broken, then there are consequences. I think then they know, whoever it is that steps out of the boundaries or pushes the boundaries, there is a problem. There's another factor which I think is a bit more subtle in that personalities of the children also influence how they push those boundaries. And it could be that your stepchild is very outgoing, is one who's going to push the boundaries, while your own child may be one who's very compliant. That makes it very difficult, especially for a dad, to come down harder on the other one. So one needs to be sensitive. Is this willful disobedience, or is it a different personality which I'm not used to having as in a child? So be aware of that as well. Just that you do make allowances for the outgoing children who are going to test you more than the compliant child. I've had one of each, brought up exactly the same, and I've had to treat them slightly differently just because I understand that God made each child different. And with those characteristics comes good and bad. And we need to mold them rather than mold them the way God has planned, rather than mold them into the way we expect them to behave and be.
Indeed, indeed.
I think from a parent point of view, when I came into the situation from Cape Town to Pretoria, something I needed to understand was that, for example, let me give you an example. Dave's daughter-in-law, he was used to approaching him, you know, so that was their link. So she would always ask Dave something, and I'd think, but I'm the mom. But you know what? I suddenly realized that she only knew him as the dad in the home. And the same with my children. They'll walk in the house, into Dave's house, our house now, and they'll ask me something. And I'll say, don't ask me, ask Dave. So what I'm saying is the children are used to the parent that they've always related to. And it can be easy for, and I'm like sharing with people out there who are struggling in step family situations where you'd expect the boy, for example, to go to the man, and you'd expect the girl to run to the lady. But maybe I brought a boy in and Dave brought a girl in, for example. It's not going to work like that. The child goes to the parent that they are used to communicating with. And that can take a very long time for the child just to relax. And as Des mentioned, to feel, as a couple, we need to trust and feel safe in each other's situation, that Dave will handle whatever it is on his side and me on my side. On the other hand, we're dealing with adult children, so very much it is an adult-to-adult situation. But yes, it is difficult with children. They relate to the person they knew from a little child, particularly when there's a situation. And I could quite easily get on my high horse and get upset and say, why didn't they come to me about it? Well, maybe because I'm more volatile than Dave. It was easier to talk to Dave. So if you take a step back from being a step parent, you realize it actually happens, as Fani said, in normal situations, depending on the age of the child and how they're relating to the particular parent.
Thank you. And while these two are still there talking about children,
can I weigh in quickly on
Okay.
that, Oscar? I think I've got a point that really needs to be re-emphasized, and it's coming from what the previous couple, Dave and I forget his wife's name, also just
Karen.
mentioned.
And Karen.
Yeah, Karen, yes. Dave mentioned one of the things which was to do with treating the kids with equity, and yet at the same time sensitive to the fact that some of them or a child or children may be more outgoing and therefore may need a little firmer hand, and yet you need to be sensitive to that. And the previous bit that he had mentioned, that where the whole conversation started was where kids might say, "You're not my dad." I think it's important for us to realize that even in non-blended families, in biological settings, you'll have kids say, "I don't think you're my mom. I don't think you're my dad," when they're upset with something. Now, it's a little easier to deal with in a full-on biological setting, but I think statements or comments like that in a blended family just feel so much worse, because it seems it's because we are blended, and kids can do that. And as parents in a blended home, I think it's necessary for us to have it on the forefront of our minds, such that if my son should say that to me, that "You're not my biological dad," I need to be prepared mentally before that happens, and understand that, it could happen with a biological child anyway. So I can deal with it with a little more grace, and it doesn't sting my ego so much. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thanks for emphasizing that. We are left with a few minutes to end our program, but I would like to actually, I wanted to ask Dave and Karen to just briefly share in terms of how you handled assets before you got married. I know when you get into a second marriage with assets, there are children who might think, "Oh, those are supposed to come to us." And how did you handle that? Can you share that briefly in a minute or so, or two?
Yes, I asked Karen just to perhaps answer, because she's a financial advisor and she knows all the terminology. I know what it's about and I know what to say, but she can just wrap it up in a few minutes far more easily than I can. So I'll leave it to her.
Okay, so what we did before we got married, we agreed that we would leave 100% of the assets to the other party. So whoever's the first dying, 100% goes to the other. However, what we did was we got married with an antenuptial contract without accrual. So we just kept the estates completely separately. We discussed this with the children. We've told them that on the first dying, the assets go to the other person. And the other is when the second spouse dies, the original assets will be split between the children. So Dave's original assets will go to his two boys. My original assets will go to my two children. So all four children and their spouses know what's happening up front. We didn't want any hidden agendas. We didn't want any situations where they say, "But my mom said, but my dad said." No, we have all discussed this. We've put it on paper. Here it is. We're even going as far as to make an inventory. And as the children visit us, we say to them, "Right, you decide which assets you want." They can write and sign their names. And then even after death, there's no discussion, because all the kids know upfront what is happening.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that to the point and briefly as well. Now, coming back to you, Des, our society makes it very, very difficult for remarriages, for second marriages, rather. There are a lot of challenges and stereotypes that are associated with remarriages, where, for example, after you lost your wife, and our society places a mourning period for you, and you have to mourn for a certain period, and only after that you have to start looking for a spouse. And where kids are involved, the deceased family would usually want you to marry from your spouse's family, because they are thinking of issues of inheritance, like assets, as Dave and Karen have said. And you also hear the children of your spouse. If your wife brought in children, they've got names that they are given, which are very derogatory, names that we can't even say. You hear, I think you highlighted the issue of, okay, this is not a biological child. And for some people, they will say, how does he keep and invest in children that are not his? All there are many of these stereotypes and challenges. So the question to you is, were you affected by such? I know you spoke about the extended family not being directly involved, but did some of these things affect you directly or indirectly?
So there was a bit of a blessing in disguise with that, if you think about it. In that, when my first wife passed away, after her death, things were pretty nasty. And with my in-laws at that stage, or ex-in-laws, and yeah, they gave me quite a rough time, and then just walked and left. And so they weren't involved in our lives at all, with the kids or anything else. They were pretty hurt, and they, I guess, vented and let it out at me in their grief, and it caused kind of a rift between us. Subsequent to that, there was very little communication, probably for the better part of 2 years, and towards the end of that, there was some communication, but in a sense, we all had become isolated and independent. So that wasn't the case. However, also, for me, coming from a Christian background, the idea of the wife's child coming in, or children coming in, had a different approach to it, as a believer for me. That's number one. And number two, because of the special circumstances in which I could clearly see God's fingerprint in having put us together, and how this young man, non-biological, was a central part of that I could tell that, you know what, this is where God wants me to be. However, for the benefit of our viewers and listeners who may not be coming from that, yes, I think that's very real. That's very true from an African setting, and maybe a real challenge. So much so, in fact, that it can be devastating to the marriage. And it's one of the things that people need to talk about and prepare before they get married. But if they haven't done so before they get married, then definitely as soon as they're into that, talk about it and realize that the kids that come into this are innocent parties. So terms or names or whatever else other people, extended families may attach to them, have to be disbanded and dismissed by the couple that's getting married and has these kids. They're the ones who take the lead in diffusing that.
Wow, thank you so much, Des, for sharing that. Profound indeed. Thank you so much. Because of our time now, yes, you want to add something?
Yes, I'd like just to say that we found that with the stepchildren, that, even if they're grown-ups, they still need some kind of a grief counseling that you as a step-parent stand in for. They have to deal with normal pressures of life, but then there's this add-on thing of the past, and they tend to connect the current problems with something of the past, and you can help them to unravel that and understand that it's not necessarily because they are they've gone through this bad perhaps situation, but it's quite normal for adult children, once they're married, that they will experience some problems, and this is a normal thing. And I think we actually try to spend some hours with our children, even when they're grown up, to just help them show the perspective that this is not really something that you have always to bring to something of the past. You can go on.
Thank you. Yeah. Dev and sorry, Fan and Delina, I'd actually wanted to ask you a question, but I think I'm going to change a bit and just ask this question to anyone who feels they want to to answer the question. When I listening to this story, I realized, the success actually of a blended family is anchored on the success of your marriage, the two of you. How do you, or rather, what advice can you give in terms of doing things that help you to stick together in the midst of all the challenges that you face as a couple, or because of blended family? Might be challenges from within and from outside. What keeps you stay focused on your marriage even before we think about blended family? I think that would be sort of our last question. If you want, anyone wants to go for it, or if all of you want to briefly comment on it, yeah, what are some of the tips that you can give, to couples to say marriage first?
I'll go briefly
Yes.
and quickly. I would say two things. One of them is to understand the purpose of marriage. Why are we married? And if we can see that purpose is hinged upon or premised upon God, then it changes things. And also the other is our commitment to it. So for me, by the age 17, I was quite convinced that marriage is not just a fairy tale story and a walk in the park. It's got work. My parents had been divorced when I was about 6 years old. And at that stage, I decided that either you get into marriage and you're going to do the work that's required and you handle the tough situations, but you just got to keep doing it and try your best to do what you ought to do, or don't get married. And then finally it was, well, where does God come in? Ultimately, he's the one who empowers and enables us to be able to survive those storms.
Thank you.
I would also like to add to that. I fully support what Des just said, and I mean, if you put God first, that is definitely the way to go and the answer. Then one must also remember that you're not married for 18 years. You're married for life in this new relationship, and your first priority is towards your wife. The children are lent to you. It's borrowed time that you have with the children for, say, 20 years or what, and after that it's bonus time. So you strive towards having wonderful relationships with the children, but they are doing their own thing. They are living their own lives, and you as a parent are not their first priority. Their first priority is and should be their own homes and their own wives and children.
Mm-hmm.
And one must realize that and live accordingly. So in a way, me and Dalena, our first priority is to take care of each other. And actually that gives comfort to the children, that they know that Dalena is taking care of me, and her children knows that I'm taking care of her. And that actually provides, it gives them happiness as well.
Mm-hmm. Wow, thank you so much. Fun in the
I think just from our perspective in a marriage situation, we're both extremely grateful for each other. And it's every day is just a wow day with each other and with the Lord. But that is all based on respect. I respect Dave. I respect what he does. He respects me. He respects what I do. And continually we just give thanks to the Lord for the opportunity of this kind of relationship in our last days.
And I think the important thing is to remember, don't compare what you have now with your new wife, your new spouse, to what was. They're different people. God has made us beautifully. He's made us different. And if there are new things that need to be adjusted to, etc., God has brought us together, and relationships build our character. And I've heard that relationships might be the cause of much hurt. but relationships are also the cause of healing or lead to healing. And you cannot be a whole person if you are an island, if you're on your own, because then you become insular, selfish, inward looking. You need to keep giving. And that is how we grow in our character. And then the other thing is, just one last thing, when it comes to discipline, and especially if you, for those who are planning to get married, you need to decide before you get married which are the big issues and which are the small issues that you can let go when disciplining children. That is for their good, but we come from different backgrounds, we've been raised differently, and a lot of the problems come from you too harsh or you too soft, etc. And one needs to say, what are the issues that are non-negotiable? So that when the one parent is absent, the other parent will uphold that. You need to be on the same page, and you need to say, these are the things that we will always agree on, because we don't want kids playing one parent off against the other, but they know that we are firm on these issues. Obviously, from day to day, there will be issues that pop up that have never been addressed, and we just need God's wisdom to handle those and how we handle it. And sometimes we need to make an immediate decision and then discuss it with our spouse. But generally, we know, as we know each other, those issues need to be discussed and biblically based.
Oh, thank you so much. Wow, we would have loved to go on, but unfortunately, because of time, we've come to the end of our program. And I'd like to say thank you to our panelists for sharing from their experiences from deep down their hearts. I mean, you made yourself vulnerable, and listening to you can just, I cannot just help it, but just thank the Lord for His hand upon your lives and your marriages. And one scripture that just came to my mind right now as I was listening to you is Isaiah 41 verse 10, where God says, "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." I'm sure our viewers listening out there have been really encouraged, listening to their stories and seeing God at work in their lives. When you think of remarrying, we've heard, that kids they want parents, and it's an opportunity to give children, maybe because they've lost their dad or their mom through one way or another, or through divorce, whatever. Another opportunity to experience the love from their parents, from both parents being in the home. So if you're thinking of getting married, be encouraged. God has gone before you. Once again, thank you so much. I am going to share the link with you on YouTube, Talk on Point Network, and please, I would kindly ask you to subscribe so that when you do such conversations, you will not miss them. But for the meantime, we have come to the end of the program, and so thank you so much, and may God be with you all.